Since the Vanguard season is over, it's only right for us to do the updated tier list for the entirety of the year, including every single CDL team. The first team on the list should not be a surprise to any team. This is going to be the only team in my D tier. It's going to be the Paris Legion, soon to be the Las Vegas Legion. The numbers are right there in front of everyone's faces. The entire year, including the kickoff classic, the Pro-Am, they quite literally only won 4 series. And they made some roster moves to try to improve their team, you know, really just be more competitive. And while they had a good amount of competitive series, they could never actually execute, close out the series. It didn't matter what roster they tried. They were simply a level below every other team in Vanguard, in my opinion. And then moving on to the C tier guys, we have 4 teams. Now, I don't necessarily have them in order just because there's a lot of gray area. All of these teams had highlights. They all had lowlights throughout the year. You know, they were great at different moments in the year. I will say that only one of them, obviously, because Paris Legion is already in the D tier, qualified for COD champs. And those 4 teams are going to be the Minnesota Rocker, Los Angeles Guerrillas, Florida Mutineers, and the Boston Breach. Now, I know this could be a hot take. A lot of people probably don't agree with Boston being in the C tier. With the rest of these teams, but I'll start with them. So here is the issue with Boston. They were just never really that good, in my opinion. Even in the beginning of the year when they were, you know, getting some nice placements, top 4, having good online qualifiers, they never played tough competition. And whenever they did play like the top teams at the time, they always lost. Now, this Boston team, they could consistently beat the teams that they were supposed to beat, but their ceiling was just so low for me. Like, they never actually looked good. I mean, that's kind of harsh, but they never really looked like they had a moment where they could maybe, you know, start a little snowball effect and start to have some really successful placings and make a deep run into a tournament. And then the same with Florida, LAG, and Minnesota. Obviously, LAG won a major. That was a fluke, okay? We all know that. I said that from the get-go. Obviously, the players on LAG at the time thought I was, you know, hating. Funny enough, though, I was 100% correct. It was a fluke. They obviously tried to make a roster change. Didn't work. They won the major, well, won a major and still didn't qualify for champs. They just had really abysmal placings the rest of the year, especially in the qualifier matches. They couldn't get the job done. Florida and Minnesota, both of these teams, they had potential, okay? But in my opinion, they were just too wildly inconsistent. Obviously, Minnesota dropped Major Maniac. They picked up Havoc. Then Major Maniac ended up going to Florida in place of Dave Patty, him and 2Real. But both of those teams, roster swaps, they didn't do enough. They didn't do enough. I think the issue with both of those teams were role issues. But when they picked up 2Real and Major Maniac, it was just more the same. Knew that was not going to work. They're very average. They've been average. It just is what it is. And then with Minnesota, I don't necessarily think picking up Havoc was a bad play. I don't think it was a bad idea. But I always thought that the main issue was a multiple person player role swap. And so even though they swapped out Havoc, or Major Maniac for Havoc, I just didn't think that they did enough work for their rosters. Moving up onto the B tier, we're going to have 2 teams. It's going to be the Toronto Ultra and the London Royal Ravens. Now, some of you guys may have a couple opinions about these 2 teams in the B tier. They are in the B tier because Boston Breach probably, arguably had a better season than both. I don't even know if I could say better season. I mean, they had some better placings. But I mean, overall, throughout the entirety of the season, they had a less win-loss percentage in the series and by actual games than both London and Toronto. But it's not even that. Both of these teams showed me more promise, and I thought that they had a chance to actually be championship caliber teams. Now, starting with London, they obviously started the year out very nice. They got 3rd place at the first major of the year. Things were looking good. They were great in the online qualifiers. But this London team just basically kept declining after that first major. Gizmo obviously took a step back. He came back. They looked like they were maybe kind of getting back into form. They had a great Major 4 qualifiers. Didn't pan out. And they were very lackluster. Okay, there were a couple times where they had very solid qualifiers and they would go into the actual major itself and just get upset early on, not really be able to make a run. That's why I have them at the B tier, because they definitely, like, they could compete with every team. I mean, even if you looked at champs, they lost 3-2, 3-2. They got reverse swept in the series to send them home. I don't think they got reverse swept in the first series. But regardless, I think B tier is a good spot for London because they were a solid, like, this is, average. You're solid. This was a solid team. And Toronto Ultra, they had a lot of ups and downs. They were a little bit of the opposite of London. Okay, London, they start out hot and they just slowly were just on a downward trend the entire year. Toronto, though, in my opinion, they're very roller coaster like. I mean, they won the Kickoff Classic and they had good majors, bad majors, really bad majors, some really good majors. And so, like, they've gotten third. They've also gone first rounded, top 12 at a major. But they stuck it out. They stuck it out. They tried to make a decent run. They ended up getting 5th, 6th at COD Champs. And they just, I don't know what it was. I don't know. They were very good in Cold War. Don't get me wrong, but they just could never fully grasp Vanguard. I think that could be, some pacing issues. They were a slower team. Obviously, they had the likes of Kleenex on their squad, but one player doesn't make your team fast. I just felt like as a whole, they were a lot slower than, the other really good, really competitive teams this year. Moving on to the A tier, guys, we're going to have 3 teams, okay? All 3 of these teams won an event this year. One of them was not a major. It was a Pro-Am, but it is going to be the Seattle Surge, Optic Texas, and the New York Subliners. This is the A tier, okay? And I know I might get a little flack for this, but hear me out. NYSO was actually a very good team once they picked up Paul X and Kismet, okay? They won the Pro-Am event. They did get first rounded, which was kind of an upset at stage 3. And then stage 4, they qualified. They made the impossible happen, qualifying for COD Champs. Made it all the way to the finals before they fell to LAT. And they got second. Then they go in to COD Champs. And they have a relatively, impressive performance, I guess, or impressive showing in my eyes. And by that, I mean, not impressive at all, but it was still 5th, 6th. They still made COD Champs. And who knows what could have happened. They lost the first series of COD Champs to FaZe 3-2. If they were able to close that series out, who knows? Because FaZe ended up making it to the finals. But regardless, I think ever since they picked up Kismet and Paul X, they were an A tier team. Now, I know this is throughout the entirety of the year, so it was kind of hard, but I just feel like the second place at stage 4, the Pro-Am win, obviously getting 5th, 6th at COD Champs, I feel like they deserve to be in the A tier. They do. And then we have Optic Texas. They started out hot. They won the first major. And then we saw the same old trend that we normally see with Optic. And I hate to bring it up, but it is relatively true. Where they start out hot in the beginning of games because they have great talent on their team. And then as the game evolves, as teams start to understand better ways to play, more optimal ways to play the game, Optic just slowly kind of declines. And that's what happened. Now, I know this year it was a little bit different, okay? Because they came out hot, looked great at the first major. They won it. They do have a major championship under their belts this year. Illy got injured. He had to step down for a bit. They played a little bit with Jordan General. They played a little bit with Prolu. Illy came back. Not sure if he's fully healed yet or what, but they just weren't as good. Well, I shouldn't say they weren't as good. They were still a great team. I mean, even at champs, they got 4th. They just weren't S tier. They weren't. The entire year as a whole, they do have a win. That's why I have them in the A tier. They were still a very, very impressive team. But other teams just kept improving throughout the year, and Optic did not. And I can't even, use the excuse of Illy being injured, because he came back and they still just couldn't perform well. I don't want to put all of, their shortcomings on Illy. I just think other teams got better. They didn't. They were just very stagnant, and which is interesting to say, because I really thought we were going to see Optic in almost every single finals this year. It just didn't happen that way. And then lastly, in the A tier is going to be the Seattle Surge. Now, this could be a very interesting take, but I love the Seattle Surge team. I do. They do have a major championship under their belt. Okay, stage 3. They also got 3rd at COD Champs. Now, this team was not the most consistent. Okay, they weren't. They've gotten top 12 at a major before. They've won one. I just feel like with the way that they played throughout the entire year, especially when we look at, like, when you just take everything into account, right? Vanguard, the game, how inconsistent the game can be. All these other teams, how they stacked up against Seattle Surge, right? How they competed in all these majors and all these qualifiers. So Seattle, yes, they had some hiccups along the way, similarly to damn near every team. I think the only 3 teams that didn't get like a first round exit at all in any of the majors COD Champs this year was LAT, Atlanta FaZe, and Optic. Every other team saw at least one top 12. Paris Legion saw it a lot of times, but they also were still able to come out on top at least once. They looked great at COD Champs, and this team always had potential to beat anyone in my eyes. When I look at a lot of the other teams on this tier list already, it would be hard for me to actually predict them to win versus any of the top dogs. I could have seen Seattle Surge winning COD Champs, truly, because of just the amount of talent they have and how well they play together. I think you have to take Vanguard into account for every team, but I have been. And I think Seattle deserves being in the A tier. And then lastly, we have the S tier. This is going to be 2 teams. You already know the 2 that are going to be on it. And this is this goes without saying realistically, but Atlanta FaZe, I do think, was the 2nd best team all year. And yes, I know that they didn't win a major. Enable, how could they be better? They didn't win a major, blah, blah, blah. Listen, man, when you get second, third, second, whatever it was, they got 4 seconds, I believe, right? 4 seconds and a third, or something insane like that. They never were out of the top 3, obviously. You have to show respect. Now, they didn't get the job done, while, the likes of LAT did it, Seattle Surge did it, Optic did it, LAG did it. But when you look at the rest of the year, right, because we're going as an entire year, these teams had really bad fall-offs where, Atlanta FaZe, even at their worst, they're still getting top 3. They made it all the way to the finals at COD Champs before falling to LAT. I think you have to really respect and tip your cap if you're a hat guy. I clearly am not, as you can see my hair, to how consistent they were. So I think it's well deserved that they are in the S tier, because at the end of the day, they were basically the final bosses that you had to beat to win an event. I'm sorry, FaZe, but it is what it is. It happened. Still a very wildly successful year. And then the best team in Vanguard, in the entirety of Vanguard, is none other than the Los Angeles Thieves. I said it, and I think it's true now. They're the only team to win 2 majors this year. They went back-to-back at Major 4 and COD Champs. When it came down to the nitty-gritty, to the most important time of the year, they were just way too far ahead. They were it was one of the more dominant COD Champs in recent memory, at least on LAN. They understood the game a lot better than every other team. They had some of the most talented players on their team, and we know when the time came, they executed and they did what they had to do. Now, this team started very hit or miss. They were one of, if not the best hardpoint team in the beginning of the game. And they fell off. They had a lot of role issues. People were calling for Octane to get dropped, Kenny to get dropped, Cap to get fired, Muddog to get fired, everybody. They stuck it through the entire year. They were the only team to stick it through. They made a They made a role swap with Kenny going to the sub. And at first, it didn't look that pretty. Now, they did get second at the the Pro-Am event where they lost to NYSL. But then things just clicked. They got comfortable on the mat with each other, and it showed because they were lights out the last two events. Like I said, they were one of 3 teams. I believe it was 3, because I don't think Optic got a top 12. They definitely didn't. I should know this, but it's late. My memory is also not good. But they never got first rounded. They had, I know before Major 4, I believe it was, they were 3rd behind Optic and FaZe for average placement across all major events, right? And I'm sure now, after going back to back, they're either 1st or 2nd. Like, it still could be FaZe with the best average placement the entire year of Vanguard. But it might be LAT. And more importantly, even if it is FaZe, LAT still won 2 majors. They were the only team to do it, the best team in Vanguard. I was saying it all year long and I was getting cooked, and looked what happened. I appreciate love as always, guys. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. You already know the YouTube vibes, whatever. And we're back on a grind. We're gonna be back on a grind, posting consistent videos. We have a lot of off-season videos coming, but not only COD related and tier list. You know, I got some stuff up my sleeve, me and my editor CJ, so it should be fun. I appreciate love as always, though. I'll see y'all when I see y'all.